If you have worked with event-driven architecture, you're probably aware of the challenges when it comes to documenting event-driven architecture well. And there's many tools around to help with that, and one of them is Event Catalog. But let me explain how this tool is going to make your event-driven architecture documentation much better. The nature of event-driven architecture is that events are what drives the architecture around. So when anything happens, any events are firing in your application, you have something that listens to these events and changes happen in your system. And most often than not, these are asynchronous changes. So we don't actually know what the result is going to be, even wait for the result. We just publish the events, and then the listeners needs to care about how they handle that event type. Now this is all cool, and actually it does help a lot if you have events in your system to make sure they all work great and they can make your application much better. But when it comes to big companies where there's multiple teams and each of the teams are responsible for multiple services, then you might end up with a lot of different event publishers that publish events. Other teams could listen to this event if they need to. I have a simple example here, which is an online store system, and it has events for when an order happens or an order is changed. Then we have a payment service that listens to that event, and we also have a notification service that sends notification whenever any event. In big companies, it's very common to see one team responsible for one microservice, or in this example, the order service will be owned by one team, the payment service will be owned by another team, and the notification service will be owned by a third team. And when we have events between these microservices, there might be challenges when it comes to how all of this is documented. I don't think I need to say it, but documentation is one of the most important tools when it comes to inter-team communication and when working on the same things. Event-driven architecture is crucial, but because it's not really new, but it is kind of new, and a lot of companies are implementing EDA recently, I've seen a lot of people struggle to document this well and how to do it properly. And we also have different domains in each of these microservices. Like the payment service doesn't need to know the whole order and all the details for the order. It probably needs to know the items and the price of each item and how many items were ordered. Anything else is not really important. But for the notification service, you might need all of the items, their names, and so we can send notification to the user that they've ordered what they've ordered. So when we publish events here in this order event queue, we need to decide what information we include and what information we don't. And there are different patterns when it comes to this, but also because each of the listeners to these events care about different data, if this is not well documented, we might end up in a very bad situation where things break and we don't know what's being sent to these events. And another thing that often happens is microservices mutate and they change, the data inside changes, the objects and the types also change. So what happens if the order object changes? If we need to migrate from version 1 to version 2, how do we go about communicating that with the other teams? Because this is also when things might break if it's not communicated properly. And this is one of the operational complexities that event-driven architecture introduces when used. With a lot of the tools that come up recently, we solve something, but we also add some kind of complexity to our systems. And event-driven architecture is not different. But how can we actually improve the documentation for event-driven architecture? Well, there's a lot of different ways we can document what kind of events we publish, what kind of publishers we have. And the one I have experience with is called Async API. And this is basically an open source specification for documenting event-driven architecture. And it looks a lot like OpenAPI documentation. It basically describes what kind of components and events you have, which publishers do you use, and what kind of events are being published to each of the publishers. And you can also publish what kind of events you're listening to and any description, any necessary information that you want for those. But this video is not about Async API, it's actually about Event Catalog. And this is a tool that helps bringing Async API or any other documentation used for your event-driven architecture and allow you to have a big overview of all the different events and publishers and listeners in your company, and basically helping with discoverability of event-driven architecture. Now, I've only played a little bit with this tool, but there's a lot of documentation here. I would highly encourage you to go through this and understand what it actually does and how it works, but I will demo they're getting started. But some of the features of the Event Catalog are: it's built with event-driven architecture in mind, it is pluggable, and it improves developer experience. It also supports any schema format, whether it's Async API or any other formats. You can keep track of your changes because it is essentially in your repo. You can integrate with third-party system like Backstage or other systems as well. It does have an SDK which integrates with basically our architectures. It is open source as well. And now time for the demo. So I did use their npx command here to get started with a new catalog. And what this basically did is it created a project, which is an Astra project with a lot of documentation around different events. And they also have a demo here as well, or some examples that you can use of how this actually looks. But I'm gonna run my project here and basically show you how this works. Now this is what the event catalog package generates. It generates all the different kinds of domain services or commands we have. We can explore the documentation for each of these. And here we can see all the services we have, all the events we have. And the best thing that I've seen is this visual here. Now this basically shows where the event is being published, who listens to the event, which services are connected to these publishers and listeners. And I think this is the best way to showcase events and event-driven architecture. And you can see here the three domains that this example has, which is basically an online catalog. And you can see which of the services are using, see which of the services invokes which commands, through which event, and we can see which events are being requested here. We can see here which events are being published as well. For example, the payment event here, we can see that the payment has been initiated. This is an event that's being fired from somewhere. It goes through the payment events channel, and the payment service receives this event, and it publishes another event when the payment has been processed. It also requests the order details or any other data that needs to be requested. We have the subscription service, which publishes user subscription started or user subscription cancelled events, and then these events can be then used somewhere else. We can filter through the events so we can see the whole flow of one event. For example, I'm looking at order confirmed here, and we see that the order service through the order event channel publishes the event order confirmed, and then this goes to two different channels or publishers that are being listened to in the inventory service, which are both being listened to in the inventory service. So you see that order is confirmed is sent, and the inventory service listens to these channels and they use the data accordingly. We can also see the documentation for each of the events. We can see the payload, we can see the schema, and this basically gives you all the information you need for each of the events. For example, if you need to use this event for something, you can just look here and find the payload, find the schema, see which channel is being published to, and use it basically. Now, in order to have all of that, you need to have documentation for all of your services, channels, events, and this is an example of how this page was made. These are examples of the events that are being published. You see here we have three different channels. We have examples of payloads, how to send an event. Then we also have the three different domains and all the what kind of events it receives, what kind of events it sends. We also have the schema and any versions. So this basically describes all of the whole application. Now in their documentation, they have anything you need to create the same example or anything that you need in your application, how to create a domain, how to create a service, what specifications do you need for that, channels, messages, flows, and everything that you need to basically recreate the same thing with your architecture. The only thing that I've noticed is it does look like a lot of stuff that you need to write, but like any good documentation, you still have a lot of stuff that you need to include, and this can replace a lot of the other documentation you have in your application. It can replace, for example, documentation for each of the services about what they do, because if you have that overview, you can basically tell the whole domain of orders and how it works and what does it do. We can see each service, we can see the change log, we can see which team owns it and all the different events that it receives. So it can show you the whole flow of certain actions that happen on the website. Now, in my opinion, what Event Catalog actually solves is having a visual of your event-driven architecture. And you could include all of this in your actual infrastructure diagram and showcase all different events and messages that are being published and listen to. But I do like how this looks. I do like that how easy it is to use. Like I said, it does feel like there's a lot of stuff that you need to write, but I still think it's great to do that. And it also does add more stuff to maintain for the people that are writing this and creating new events. But the benefit of good documentation, I think, really helps and basically is worth it with all the extra maintainability, with all the extra maintenance that's been added to the project. My event catalog is still in the early stages. It's on version 2, but I think it has had great progress, and I just learned about it like a month ago. I went to a talk from the person that created this, David Boyne, and it was a great talk about event-driven architecture and some of the pitfalls with that. But I wanted to make a video about this tool and what it does, because I think it's a great tool and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. I'm definitely going to be trying out and using this and playing around with it. But yeah, that's been pretty much it for this video. Hope you liked it, hope you enjoyed. If you have any feedback, put it down in the comments below. But other than that, enjoy the rest of the day. Happy coding, bye.